impacted by China reaching out to them in the last couple of months. I mean, a big Chinese delegation here, 140 people total, 10 ministerial level attendees, and they are on a mission to try to ensure that they can help turn around their economy by engaging with major multinationals, major financiers, major investors.
And what are the CEOs telling you? Are they convinced that they can go back, or have they burned their fingers enough and are singed at the moment?
I mean, they're getting access. I mean, these are CEOs that were, for a very long time, had plans that they wanted to engage in. The Chinese weren't giving them any response. They weren't giving them any access. They weren't moving. They weren't returning calls. You never write. Now they are. Now Chinese are sending delegations to their countries. They're engaging. They're giving them licenses. They're giving them partnerships. Look, I mean, I would not say this is suddenly we trust China, now China's the country that we're all going to go and flock to, but this is a very different kind of power balance in the relationship. And if you think that China's going to grow at 3% for the next few years, and you think they're going to give you an opportunity to do business, there are a lot of people here that are prepared to take that. So that does feel like actually a shift in trajectory. I sensed that at the APEC summit. When Biden met with Xi in November, but it's much more clear a couple months later. Now you're actually seeing the CEOs say it. Across the board, I've seen that.
The thing that stood out to me as being very interesting is the fact that the Davos consensus seems to be around the inevitability of Donald Trump somehow coming back to power. When I left, I thought, okay, he may be nominated, may not be nominated, there's still a legal process, he could be convicted, etc. But here, a lot of people just talking about the fact that not just is he almost certainly going to contest, but they think that he might win.
Well, remember, the Iowa caucuses were on Monday. So that means Davos started and Trump just had that big win. So, I mean, the confluence of those two factors definitely has an impact on the way people think about it. I think it is very clear that Trump will get the nomination. And people were hoping that might not be the case. They were thinking, well, maybe DeSantis, maybe Haley has a shot. You know, they've seen all the indictments. They've seen all the craziness. I mean, these are serious, serious issues. And yet, no, nothing has slowed him down. So he's going to get the nomination. And that is a very important thing, because as soon as he gets that nomination, like literally that moment, all of the Republicans will be loyal to him. He'll have the media, he'll have the money, he'll have Congress, he'll have the House, he'll have the Senate. And that is a very big deal. So you put all of that together, you know, that is going to change the way we think about the U.S. political
Since you look so carefully at risk, probabilistically, what are the odds of Trump winning at the moment?
I'd probably say 60-40.
Why 60-40? Why not 70-30, 50-50?
Yeah, I know, but I'm going to tell you, I don't have strong conviction 10 months out that 60-40 is right. Why 60-40? Because Trump's polling well right now compared to Biden.
60 he wins.
Yeah, 60 he wins. Why 60-40? Because the economy in the United States is right now priced for perfection. People are expecting it's going to continue to do very well. I actually think that inflation is going to be a little higher than people think. You're not going to see interest rates go down as quickly as the markets think. That's going to be a bit of a problem for Biden. I also think that people are underestimating how important it is that when Trump gets the nomination, he becomes much more powerful. He gets much more attention. And they forget that that really matters for an election. It's not just, you know, we always say incumbent presidents have advantages. Well, Trump is also an incumbent president, right? I mean, he was president. We rarely have two presidents facing off against each other. And that undermines how strong the incumbent presidency effect is. So you put those things together, I think it gives him an advantage. But Trump is likely to be convicted in the Washington case before the election. That will turn some independents off. I think that's a big deal. And the abortion issue is going to be on the ballot in a number of key states for the election. That's going to bring a lot of women out to vote that really don't like Trump, because they see him as turning back the clock on their rights by 50 years in appointing the judges that undid Roe versus Wade. So it is very close. Anyone that thinks, oh, the election is over, it's Trump's, they're crazy. They have no idea. But what I like about the fact that the Davos consensus is he's going to win is it makes them prepare for what that would look like.
So explain that to us, especially for an Indian audience. What could a Trump presidency potentially mean?
Well, I mean, interestingly, for an Indian audience, India is one of the very few countries in the world that will actually have quite strong relations with the U.S., whether it's Trump or Biden. So this election doesn't actually mean that much for the people that are watching this interview right now. But in other parts of the world, like right here in Europe, this is incredibly important. There's a war going on in Ukraine, the heart of Europe, that Putin is going to do so much better if Trump wins, because Trump sees Zelensky as a personal enemy. he's going to go after him. He's going to cut off the aid. And that's going to divide Europe. There are going to be Europeans that are saying, okay, well, we've got to work with Russia now. There'll be a lot of other Europeans that are saying, what are you, crazy? I mean, like, we've got to be fighting these people. So this is kind of an existential crisis for NATO, for the EU. And, of course, in the United States itself, if Trump loses, he goes to jail. If Trump wins, he is going to politicize the Department of Justice, the Internal Revenue Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, to not only to undo those investigations against him, but to go after the people that have been investigating him.
Can he be in jail and be president?
Well, I mean, this, in principle, there is no law in the books in the United States
in India,
that says
there
that
is.
you can't. Well, the United States is not India. But, it is, the Supreme Court may well rule on that. And look, the fact is, you're asking me that question. We have so many things that are happening in the U.S. right now that are unprecedented. And because they've been happening for a while, like January 6th and like 91 indictments against the president and 2 impeachments, but impeachment is broken, all these things, Americans are starting to normalize it. They're starting to think, well, I guess it's not such a big deal. No. It has never been like this before. These things have never happened.
Why are they happening now in your view?
Well, I think first they're happening now because Trump is individually a uniquely destructive presence. But he reflects a lot of anger in the United States that you've seen to different degrees in different countries to break things. People want someone that represents them to fight against the establishment. And the establishment is not just political figures. It's also the media. It's also the universities. It's also the scientists. And no one does that as effectively as Donald Trump. So, look, I mean, the fact is that we now have an environment in the United States where you have 2 completely different groups that not only see each other as the enemy, but they don't even agree on basic shared facts. Their narratives are completely different. Their information environment's completely different. And in that regard, Biden and Trump supporters today have more in common with Russians and Ukrainians, or with Israelis and Palestinians.
A lot of Republicans we met here seem to be arguing that Trump is running a more calibrated campaign than he did last time, and this Trump presidency, they claim or they believe, will be more mature, more sorted, more organized than the last one. Are they for real, or are they?
No, I mean, the last campaign, let's keep in mind that before Trump was president, he had no idea how to run a campaign. And so, in that regard, he had the D-list working with him. I mean, he had Paul Manafort, who should have been in prison, and then was, running his campaign. So, I mean, obviously, if you're asking, are they going to run a more disciplined campaign than that? Yes. But Trump is the same person. Right? I mean, I've seen coverage. If you remember Jurassic Park, and then, the Velociraptor is chasing after the kids, the family, and then you find out that the Velociraptor learns how to turn the doorknob, and it's like, that's like Trump. He's learned how to turn the door. No, this is the same Trump. If you read his social media, if you watch him at the rallies, he has not changed at all. He is narcissistic. It is all about him. It is all uppercase, shouting at you all the time, and it's also, he's a showman. He's a marketer. I mean, he's actually an incredible campaigner. And the thing is, even if he's unfit as a president, to become president, you need to campaign. And he campaigns better than anybody else out there. He attracts the attention. People want to talk about him. You and I haven't talked about Biden much so far. He's the president. Biden's the most important political figure in the world today, and yet we're talking about Trump, which is kind of annoying, but it also does reflect this supernatural skill that he happens to possess.
On the global high table, how is India doing in your view? Is India living up to the hype that we're seeing in India, or do you think there's more talk than action?
I think I was about, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, you had India with the incredible India and the big coming out party, and they're going to now is the time. That was premature, wasn't the case. Very different story today. Modi's a much stronger leader. He has a number of economic reforms under his belt. He's softened the Hindu nationalism a bit, which has turned him off from a lot of Western governments historically, and of course NGOs. Of course, the Indian economy is performing very strongly at a time that China is not. India just had a very successful chairmanship of the G20, led by Modi, an incredibly capable G20 Sherpa. And also, India has pretty good relations with the U.S., with Europe, and of course with Japan. And they even managed, the little flap with the assassination of the Canadian national, was a problem, but ultimately is getting managed, and I think that is an important thing.
Why do you think Hindu nationalism, from your lens, is being toned down?
Well, first of all, he doesn't need it as much. Number one. Number two, he can run on other things, but also I think he's focusing more on class. He's focusing more on actually trying to lift sort of the underprivileged castes and also the lower and working classes in India. And in that regard, that's a more inclusive measure that he can take.
In the event that he does win,
Yeah.
as the polls at this moment suggest, in a global context, what does that mean for India's position and its ascent in the world rankings?
Well, look, I don't really care about the ascent in the world rankings because, at the end of the day, you have an economy that's number 5 in the world, number 4 in the world. You're still the same people.
Sure.
But I'm very interested in how one engages with other countries. And India, in my view, is particularly important in what it is not. It is not a country that is trying to align the global south to China. It is not a country that is trying to create a system of 2 blocks, south versus north. For a long time, we talked about developing countries in economic terms, emerging markets. We talked about the BRICS. The BRICS originally was an economic term. It was Goldman Sachs. Today, BRICS is a political term. It's a political unit, and we don't talk about developing countries. We talk about the global south. It's a political terminology. That has the potential to be very oppositional, could create blocks. India is the single most important reason why that isn't happening, because India's role in the global south is also linked to, we don't want to just do China's bidding. We actually want to have a very differentiated global south, and we also want to have very good relations long term with the U.S., Europe, and Japan. So, look, if instead of Modi, you had an Indian government that looked more like the ANC in South Africa, that was a much more, again, anti-apartheid, anti-colonial, more reactionary, strongly pro-Palestinian, but also much more willing to kind of tilt towards China on global south issues, the BRICS would look very different. It would be much more of an anti-Western bloc. That's not happening at all, and I think that Modi's role is actually important in that.
How do you see the India-China dynamic play out from where we are at right now?
Well, the fact that China not only has an underperforming economy, but also has geopolitically been on the back foot in their own backyard because of the Quad, but also because of the trio of South Korea, Japan, and the United States that are now much closer than they were just a couple of years ago before the Japanese and the South Koreans made up. You've also got the Indonesians improving their relations with the U.S. and with Japan. The Philippines offering the U.S. bases, 8 bases in the Philippines. All of this is telling the Chinese, you overplayed your hand in your own backyard.
They're not dialing back on India in any way.
No, they're not.
Why not?
But I think that, I think at the end of the day, the West is more important, both strategically and economically, to the Chinese than India. And perhaps they see that Indian leadership is more challenging to move the needle on with them.
In your reading of the Chinese mind,
Yeah.
in the fracas that they've created along the line of actual control, what has China got?
Oh, I don't think the Chinese have gotten very much geopolitically in the entire region. It's not just with India. But again, I think it's quite possible that there is an opening for Modi with the Chinese to stabilize relations more if he wants it. But I'm not.
But he tried. They invited Xi to Delhi for the G20. Xi never came.
I know. Different environment. Again, the economics in China, this has all really started in the last few months. The United States was in a period of serious decline with China really until October, November, right? And that's when we started to see the turnaround. There weren't even military-to-military direct communications. You now have an entire constellation of essentially strategic and economic dialogue, but built from the ground up between the Chinese and the Americans. I've seen it with Australia, with the state visit that happened. I don't see any reason why that's not worth continuing to try.
No, but only if China pulls back some of the infrastructure and deployments on the line of actual control will it make sense for Prime Minister Modi to come on the table.
What I am saying to you is that when Biden reached out to the Chinese hadn't yet done anything, right? This was after the balloon crisis, when the Americans and China were talking about, might we have military confrontation directly going forward? The U.S. ends up shooting it down. The U.S. calls the Chinese on the hotline. They don't even pick up the phone. That's a lot worse than not showing up in person at the G20. They didn't boycott the G20. They still showed up. Come on, at the end of the day. So what I am saying is, you don't have to, in a challenging relationship, someone always has to make the first move. And if both partners are dug in and they refuse to make the first move, then you never fix the relationship. I do think that there was a little humility on the part of the Americans in reaching out to the Chinese that you wouldn't have expected necessarily them to have.
I want to spend a moment on Iran and Pakistan.
Yeah.
In the Indian neighborhood, it's quite different from what one would imagine.
Yeah.
Pakistan firing into Iran, Iran firing into Pakistan. How do you see that play out?
Well,
is there a limited fracas? Could it grow?
I hope it's a limited fracas. I don't think we know. But I mean, what we do know is that while the Iranians initially blamed Israel for the ISIS terrorist attacks in Iran, it wasn't Israel. It wasn't the United States. It was ISIS. And, apparently a lot of those terrorists right now are based in Pakistan. And so the Iranian government has reacted. And this is an Iranian government that, on the one hand is feeling pretty assertive right now on the national security side. They're providing an enormous amount of support to a bunch of actors that are actually attacking.
But those are proxies. This is going and firing themselves.
This is directly, yeah, but this is not against the United States. This is against Pakistan. So, I mean, they feel like they can get away with it. My point is, I'd like to believe that both sides have engaged in strikes, that there's at least a possibility of diplomacy as a consequence of that.
Your reading of the military capacities of these two countries?
Oh, geez. I mean, I would say that the Iranians certainly have a very robust military capacity. That's the one I focus on the most, in part because I've seen how much they've been doing with the Russians. I mean, they've been able to completely build up drone capabilities inside Russia inside a year, to the extent that Russia right now has more capacity than they did before the war started, despite all the sanctions. That's a pretty big deal. Again, the Iranians have been in a region where they've had to become quite creative in dealing with sanctions and being able to still build their programs, a nuclear program as well as various kinds of military programs. That seems to me pretty robust. Pakistan's economy is in much greater trouble right now. They're under a lot of pressure domestically. I worry more about them in that regard, and this is not a good time for them to have this fight.
The Iranian foreign minister was at the World Economic Forum. What are you making of the moves Iran is making, and on the question of the potential of escalation of the Israel-Hamas war?
So the Iranians absolutely don't want a shooting war against the Americans directly. The problem is that Iran believes they have a fair amount of flexibility to escalate before that becomes a risk. Right, because they know that Biden has no interest in this. It's not like Trump, where out of the blue he orders the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. They know that is not Biden's modus operandi. So I think the Iranians believe that they can continue to provide an awful lot of support for direct attacks against shipping and even American bases before they risk getting involved in a direct fight with the United States. So as a consequence, I think there's still significant potential for escalation.
No, given the fact that the Houthis are now constantly attacking these shipping lines,
right.
How do you see that play out? What do you think will happen in the Middle East this year?
Well, you have to understand that the Houthis are not just about Gaza. The Houthis are about Yemen, and there's been a civil war in Yemen, and they're trying to gain the upper hand. And one way to do that is to show that you are the leader of the axis of resistance against the United States and Israel in favor of the Palestinians. That's a very popular thing to be, and it's going to attract more money, more support for them from the region, and it's also, of course, bringing a lot of people out in Yemen in support of them as well. So that's why they're doing this. And as long as Biden is particularly cautious in saying, hey, we're going to hit military capabilities, but they're not getting into a full-fledged war with the Houthis, they're not targeting their entire leadership, there's still room for these guys to be nuisances in disrupting global shipping traffic, which is costing the world, of course.
President Zelensky was here. They also had a dialogue of 70-plus national security advisors. Do you think he goes back more assured that the world will support him, or he goes back more anxious that maybe they're beginning to look away?
No change. He was anxious coming in. He's anxious coming out. There were 83 countries that met together with the Ukrainian government. Zelensky wasn't yet here in Davos, but to try to talk about peace, but no Russians, no Chinese. We're not any closer to peace, obviously. The Ukrainians really need $60 billion from the United States in military support this coming year. We don't know if it's coming yet. I mean, Chris Murphy, senator, didn't show up. He was supposed to be here, canceled the last few moments because he's trying to get that $60 billion with a border deal as well linked to it for the Ukrainians. Chris Coons, my very close friend, left a day early because he's going back to try to help get that money done. That is the Senate can get it done. The House, with the problems with the Speaker right now, very hard to see if he's in a position where he can put that forward and not be thrown out as Speaker, which is what happened to Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker. So I think right now the position for Ukraine is deeply, deeply uncertain.
Could Putin win in the end, do you think?
Well, I mean, Putin can definitely win in Ukraine. I don't think Putin can win globally. I mean, the reality is that half of his assets have been frozen. He's got 12 rounds of sanctions from the Europeans. He's a pariah, I mean, for the entire West. You can't have any Russians coming to Davos. It's not just here, it's everywhere. The G7, all the rest. You can't talk to them. So, I mean, that's really making Russia into a rogue state where, I mean, their closest friends that are helping them militarily are the Iranians and the North Koreans. It's pretty pathetic. So, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, I think Putin can definitely acquire illegally territory that isn't his. I don't think anyone's going to push him off of that. But the costs of that are very high. Anyone that looks at the rest of the world and says, oh, the lesson that you're going to take is that you can just go ahead and oppose the West and take land, there's a huge cost to that.
Do you think China might make a move on Taiwan at all?
No.
Till when?
Foreseeable future.
What is the foreseeable future? 4 years?
I don't know. I mean,
years?
A few years at least. I mean, it's very hard to say what's going to happen long term. There are a lot of things that are changing in the world. But when I look at this new election we just had, which is the leader that China did not want to win, the DPP guy, the vice president, the guy they were worried is going to be more pro-independence, it was very well managed. The Chinese don't want this problem. They don't want this problem for the reasons we talked about. Why the CEO, I started the interview, why the CEO is happy with China right now? Because the Chinese are in a tougher position. They do not want a big fight with Taiwan. They can't afford it. From the semiconductor position, it'll destroy their economy. It's a war they might not win. It's amphibious. It's 100-mile wide. It's incredibly hard to do. They saw how the Russians have done in Ukraine. It's really difficult. This is not a fight they want.
Lastly, one of the big risks this year is around artificial intelligence and the potential for misuse in an election, misinformation, disinformation. Is that going to be a fringe factor? Do you think it could be very central in some countries on how the election campaigns play out?
I mean, everything I've seen from Sam Altman and many others are that the rollout of GPT-5 and other similar models is faster than you think and is going to blow you away in terms of its capabilities. And we already have AI that's passed the Turing test. For decades, the Turing test, which was thought to be like the ne plus ultra of AI, never going to be able to accomplish it, is I can create a machine that can make you think it is a human being over the context of a 15-minute conversation. ChatGPT-4 did that. It's been broken. And I mean, we're keeping on, but the reality is that facilitates disinformation. It facilitates deep fakes. Now, we already have disinformation aplenty that's threatening the U.S. election before AI. So add AI to that, I think it's a significant risk.
We'll leave it here.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
I look forward to having you in India sometime.
I look forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Get ready for an immersive journey into the heart of news, politics, and insights that matter. Join India Today now on WhatsApp. Scan the QR code.
Sveda by Cola. Wish everything cared for your skin.
Get ready for an immersive journey into the heart of news, politics, and insights that matter. Join India Today now on WhatsApp. Scan the QR code.
Colors by Cola makes you wish everything was as vibrant.
As India gears up for the 75th Republic Day, immerse yourself in a celebration of our vibrant heritage and military might. Brave new Bharat on world stage. Witness the grandeur of the Republic Day parade. January 26th with India Today. Jai Ho!